So, what we do here, first of all, this is resharing the collective setting. Collective setting simply means that we're going to look at what's going on within household, not only across households, and we try to model the resharing and the decision making within the household. What we do in this research, I won't have much time to talk about this, but that's the feature of this particular, of the recent development that we had, was endogenous labor supply. The idea here is that if you're hit by an external shock, one possible response to that is changing your labor supply, like working more. And actually, we do see in data that people do that, but we want to incorporate that in the model. How does it interact with formal or informal sharing mechanism? And another aspect of this, which is linked but conceptually different, is that part of the risk is income risk, but part of the risk is wage risk. There is a huge difference between income risk and wage risk, because wage risk triggers a response automatically, in a sense, in terms of labor supply, and that's something that we want to capture. Let me briefly summarize the existing test, and there are two families of tests. The first one is Rob's Indian Village paper. It's a test of what's called the neutrality principle. Neutrality principle is something which is very simple and very powerful. If you have a collectivity and you want to check whether those people are sharing risk efficiently, and you don't know what the preferences are. Of course, if you had the list of each and everyone's utility function, you could do plenty of stuff, but in general, we don't have this. But there is a very simple characterization, a conceptually simple characterization. We are going to argue in a minute that putting it into action may be a bit more difficult, but the conceptually simple characterization is the following. If you take a collectivity and if risk is shared efficiently within this collectivity, my consumption, my welfare, we don't measure welfare, but my consumption, should vary with the total amount of resources available at the group level, because of course, if the whole collectivity is hit by a shock, each and every person will be affected. But controlling for that, it should not depend on my own income. So in other words, if I'm hit by a shock, but the shock is diversifiable in the sense that the shock does not have an impact, global impact on the collectivity itself, then if I am fully insured, this shock should have no impact whatsoever on my own consumption. And in principle, there is a very simple way of testing this, which could be, let me look at I have data on the private consumption, either of individuals or of households, and let me regress that on aggregate consumption at the collectivity level, and then my private income, and the neutrality principle seems to imply that if I run a regression like this, the coefficient of this guy here should be 0. Seems to imply, because in practice it does not, and if you do this kind of test without thinking carefully about the underlying theory, you might end up with something which is completely misspecified and gives you completely wrong answers. And actually that's exactly a situation in which you need to understand exactly the theoretical framework to do the right test. So that's exactly what I'm going to talk about in a minute. Let me mention the second type of test, which are the Euler equations. Well, the Euler equations, you're familiar with this. This is in a more dynamical setting, so assume that you have, for instance, spinal data. Ideally, we have spinal data, so we can do that. If you make the assumption that in addition to everything, utility is separable across periods, then we have the property that any information available at time t, which is relevant for future welfare, should be incorporated in current consumption. The equation is something like this. The expected marginal utility of consumption tomorrow should be, once normalized by the interest rate, this is, I left that outside, but should be equal to the marginal utility of consumption today. And the way you test that is, so in other words, any information available today that's relevant for consumption tomorrow is already in consumption today. So once I have put consumption today, it's a sufficient statistic and I can forget about anything else. So again, I can try to run a regression in which I try to explain the left-hand side, putting the right-hand side, and then plenty of additional variables that were observable today, and in principle, those additional variables should be. Again, the devil is in the details, and in particular, I shouldn't put consumption, I should put the marginal utility of consumption. I don't know what that is, how do I model it, and there are issues. But I will spend most of my time talking about this.